the assessment activity, and that is demanded in the current context. Now, here we talk about learning outcomes. In the present context, even you might have seen from the directions from the universities or from UGC, we say that they are emphasizing that we need to move towards outcome-based education. So what is the outcome? So what is that input? So when you want to talk about outcome, then what is the input of that? If we say I'm giving some kind of education, means what is the output of that education? So that is what they are trying to say, that we need to move towards looking into outcome-based education. So when we are trying to talk about outcome-based education, it talks about two major important aspects. One is what is the course attributes and what is the graduate attributes of the education. Okay. So for example, if I want to become a BSc graduate or a BA graduate or any other graduate, either at the UG level or at the PG level, so what is it's that course objective attributes? What are those qualities, characteristics individual is trying to acquire by studying them through various semesters, by undergoing varieties of activities? What is that characteristics he has to imbibe? And what is that he has to demonstrate in whatever ways it has been presented to him in the real life context? And through that course objective, we develop that graduate attributes. So that means if I am a science graduate, means whenever any situation comes in front of me, I must analyze from scientific ways. So that means I need to understand what are its causes and what will be its consequences and what are its probable way of looking at things. If I am not able to do in that way, then I fail to demonstrate my graduate attributes. So therefore, the present education scenario demands that the education is not for examination. It is for one's own life process itself, and it is for how he is trying to utilize that for his own life-making activities and even living activity also. So it is in that way we are talking about outcome-based education. So that means whatever we try to provide as input through our courses, through our discipline, that must enable them, empower them to acquire the related knowledge and skills and then try to use them in their day-to-day activity. It is in that perspective, learning outcomes are desired. So learning objectives, we can perceive it as the intended activities. Before entering into the classroom, what I intend to do that. So learning outcomes means at the end of the classroom, what is that I have achieved after deliberating 40 minutes or 60 minutes of my transaction? What is that I expect that a learner to achieve it, and how do they demonstrate that is what we try to look at it as learning outcomes. Okay, so learning objectives, learning outcomes, even if you write process outcomes or product outcomes, everything is a statement that we try to write, and that statement we are going to see when it is going to be attained, is that when it is written and how it is going to be achieved. That is what we are going to articulate. So now in the present context, we talk about learning outcomes rather than looking into learning objectives. So here the focus is developing on the competencies. Okay, competencies of the learner by teaching my discipline subject. Okay, my subject knowledge, by teaching that subject should empower him with related competencies. Okay, for example, if I am learning language, means I must develop my language, should convert that itself into my communication skills. Okay, so it may be my speaking skills, or it is my writing skill, it is my expression skills that I'm going to develop. So the language learning should enable me to convert that into my different kinds of skills, and which I can use it in anywhere, in any form. If I'm good in writing, then I become literary activist, and I do it literary in different areas, including cinema. I can write cinema stories, lyrics, and many things, and I can try to use that as my vocation. Okay, if I am science, science, I'm science student, then I need not always aspire to become scientist, but I should have that scientific bend of mind in looking into all kinds of activities I come across. And I try to have reasons for each and everything. I must try to know what is the consequence of that. So I must try to do that. Okay. So it is in that way the outcomes are not focused on the subject knowledge. They're only focusing on the subject knowledge. It is trying to evolve the related competencies that needs to be derived from these kinds of factors. Then it can be, even as we say that objectives are also measured, even learning outcomes are written in forms of objectives, and that can also be measured qualitatively or quantitatively to assess the learner's progress in the classroom. So that means here I can use this learning outcomes as an indicator of how my learners are learning, how they are doing in my subject, what is their position earlier, after undergoing this course, what is their position now, has it increased from the levels, from lower level to higher level, or at the stagnated level, what is that? You are able to look at that and accordingly take appropriate measures to address that issues. And we should also believe that assessment is a being integral part. You should not treat it as a separate activity. It is a part and parcel of teaching learning activities. So it is not a course end activity. It can be done before the lesson, during the lesson, and after the lesson. So we do that, and we are doing it, and we don't consider everything as assessment, but only at some juncture we treat them as assessment. Otherwise, it is assessment. I can do it before the class, during the class, after the class also I can try to do that. So therefore we say it is an integral part, and assessment is a continuous process. Okay, if you believe that teaching learning is a continuous process, then assessment also becomes a continuous process, and it is an integral part of the teaching learning activity. So it cannot be dealt exclusively, separately as an activity. So that is what we need to understand. So they have been formulated outcomes. You are trying to formulate them. You try to write them to meet the challenges of 21st century demands. What is the 21st century demand that now we have made with the revolution in science and technology? Now our entire planet has been made as a one single village, global village. We have internet connectivity, global connectivity is there. So I need to prepare an individual, a graduate, who is not only to serve my own country, he should also serve the entire globe. He is going to be for a globalized citizen, meeting the demands of the globe, meeting the requirements of the society across the globe. So therefore, when we compete with the global level, then there are varieties of competitions at the state level, at the district level, at the national level, at the country level. So these competitions are there. When the competitions are held, then you need to develop that particular competencies and skills that you have. And it should match with the global levels, not with the state levels or at the sub levels. So we have to look at the highest levels and try to meet that. So to meet that challenges of preparing not only citizens of India, preparing citizens for the whole world. So you have to prepare an individual having those kinds of competencies. So that is what we are trying to look at. So therefore, we say that learning outcomes are the expectations, the competencies, and the skills learners need to acquire to groom themselves into a good factors, good individuals, learners contributing to making an egalitarian country. So that means here, so we try to write these learning outcome statements covering these three major aspects. One is the expectation of that particular subject, the competencies of that subject, and the skills that it involves in learning the subject. I must try to learn everything to make them to become good citizen of the globe, and also for making the country to be more in the allied group of the country. So we consider it as developed countries and developing countries. So India is being treated as developing country. Okay, now we need to become developed country means you have to match with the developed country status and their competencies and skills levels. We need to match them. So to match them means I have to write learning outcomes which are related with all these kinds of activities. It is not just learning of the content is not the important. It is learning the essence of the content and the skills is so important. And we know that whatever classroom or whatever lectures we do in any classroom, it is a very structured one. So that means it is predetermined activity. It is a pre-decided activity. And we try to do that activity with a purpose. And at the end of that, we need to realize, reflect back and see to what extent the purposes are achieved. So it is in that way, I need to look at it as a very structured approach it is. And therefore, we need to know what is the experiences you are going to give, what pedagogical approaches we are going to take, and what is the way in which we are going to create conducive learning environment. How do you form groups? How do you create and extend the collaborations among the learners? And how do you make varieties of interactions based on the subject knowledge itself? We are going to do that. So all these things we are trying to provide it to make it the more enriching learning experiences of every learner in the classroom. So that is what you have to consider. Then learners in the classroom, in the present context, when you are talking about learning outcomes, must have much scope for interacting, sharing, cooperating, and communicating in the classrooms for all learning purposes. So that means your learning is not one-sided, it is not individual, it is not isolated, it needs to be a social environment. So when you consider social environment, all these processes are likely to happen. And therefore, it gives much scope for individuals to develop their communication skills, expression skills, putting their ideas across and arguing for their ideas, and then accepting the weaknesses that are there in the idea, trying to modify their idea, accepting the others' views also. All these factors will come when we try to learn in that. Okay, and then it is to be written that it is to be understood that these learning outcomes are most majorly focused on process-based learning approaches. So it gives much importance to the process rather than the product. And it also says that the teacher and learners should work together in a partnership mode. So we say that they are the co-learners. So teacher should not believe that I have learned it, so therefore I am not going to learn anything new in the class. No, they are facilitating the learner in the classroom. So therefore you need to work along with the learner as a novice in that context. Then you become a co-learner. And therefore you exhibit your accountability. As a teacher, you are showing your accountability of facilitating, enhancing the every abilities of every learner. And learner also knows that because I have to reach my objective, I have to learn this activity and he will discharge his responsibility. So it is in that way, both teachers and learners' accountability is also prescribed and described there. And by doing all these activities jointly, then we say it is a step towards bringing in quality education. That is, and your outcome also talks about inclusion of varieties of your information communication technology and also making assessment practices as learning. Okay, so that means here assessment is not done only by the teacher, it has to be done even by the learners also. If you want your learner also to do the assessment, how do we enable them to do that? And therefore, by bringing in all these things, ICT and assessment changes, practices, you can see we are also trying to bring in more reforms in our examination system. Okay, so we are all our learning is now focused towards examination only. So we need to come out of that, and it is not the examination, it is something beyond examination. That is what we need to look at. Okay, so these are the qualities or the characteristics that needs to be visualized among the learners after undergoing the learning process for a sustained duration. So that means your learning outcomes are going to be achieved when the learner undergoes the learning process, and that learning process takes place over a period of time. It is not 1 minute, 2 minutes, certain period of time is going to be devoted for that. The learners undergoes all those kinds of actions and experiences and activities, only then the quality of learning emerges, and therefore we can assure the learning outcomes. So based on all the above factors, we can put that as an equation like learning outcomes are a statement which can be written in a mathematical way as equal to curricular expectations plus the competencies and the skills that is involved in the subject knowledge. Whichever subject you are going to teach, that subject knowledge has its own expectations, has got its own competencies to be developed, and it has got its own skills also to be developed in the same subject area. When all these three are attempted and attained, only then you are assured that my learning outcomes are achieved. So otherwise, it is going to be mere only learning activities. So therefore, with that background in mind, now we'll try to understand assessment. So because why the linkage is without having the objectives or without having the learning outcomes as the background reference point, we cannot carry out the next activity, that is the assessment activity. Though we may say that it is an integral part, you may use it differently for different purposes. But here you are trying to see how I am going to make a very systematic assessment practices into my process. So what are the major functions of assessment? Why do we carry out the assessment? The first one, to facilitate learning. If that is your concern, yes, I am going to facilitate learning. Then how do you facilitate? By knowing at what level, entry level they are, by looking into their abilities, by looking into their mental factors or their intellectual factors, we can able to see at what level they are there, where they stand. What is the majority of the learners? Are they in the same level or at varying levels? If they are in varying levels, then I have a different groups. How do I deal with them? How do I give different activities for different groups? That you have to look out and you have to work in that direction. So if your focus is only on learning, facilitate learning, then you have to look into these aspects. The extent of attaining the set objectives. Okay, whether it is objectives or outcomes that you have written, you need to look at what was the objective, how many objectives you have fixed in, and how many of them you are able to attain successfully. You are going to look at it. Then what kind of motivations you have adopted, what motivational technique and strategies that you have used to motivate your learners towards learning, to a better learning. Okay, so it is in that way you are trying to look at it, and then you need to monitor the entire learning process. You cannot leave the learner on their own. Group activity, you cannot just assign group activity and leave the class. So you need to monitor them, try to provide support system by assisting them, by giving your clues, by giving some directions for using the different objects. So it is in that way you are going to do the monitoring activity, supervision activity, helping them and also improving the, all you are trying to do that only to help in achieving the improvement in your learning outcomes. You expect that this learning outcome is in some levels, so you want to increase it to the next higher level. So it is in that way you are trying to look from learning perspective. If your purpose of assessment is only to facilitate learning, then you will consider all these factors and accordingly you will try to assess each of these components separately. If your factor is to facilitate teaching, if you are only looking from a teacher perspective, then you are going to ask question to what extent I am able to reach my learner. In a class of 40 or 80, how many of them are able to make a comprehensive meaning out of that? How many of them were sure of making their own independent interpretations? How many of them are able to apply it in any given different context? So it is these kinds of things. Now then, if there are subjects is not understood by majority of the students, by looking at their faces, and if when you ask a question, the way they try to react, the way they try to establish eye contact with you, all of them are indication of your effectiveness in the class. So how many of them are volunteering to give response to your question? How many of them come forward to do activities in your classrooms? So they are all kind indications of your assessment, effectiveness of your teaching in your classroom processes. So you need to be more attentive on these aspects and try to look at that. And then using those as its indicators, you try to work on those to make your teaching more effective. Then for institutional or professional development requirement. Okay, it is a necessary. So as we are there working in a college, so after the end of semester, we need to submit our marks. So there are C1, C2 marks are there, and C3 has to be given. If all of the marks are not there, then the results will not be declared. So these are institutional requirements. So we try to assess them as it requires, either in terms of marks or in terms of grades, letter grades, or it is marking grade, we give them, and then they consolidate and the results are declared. Whether it is semester grade average, SGPA, or it is CGPA, this has been arrived at. These are all institutional requirements. So only to certify what kind of learner and learning achievement has happened in that way, keeping that these are the things that we try to do. So that means you must keep it in mind that my assessment is going to satisfy my own perspective as a teacher. If I'm trying to look at it, it's from teacher perspective. And if I want to see the benefit, enhance the abilities of learners, how they are being developing those abilities through my creation of predetermined activities can be seen in terms of learning. And then to meet your institutional requirement also, the mandatory requirements, you need to do the assessment. So for these purposes, the assessments are done. Okay, either for one or for all three, assessment can be carried out. Now, how do we do this assessment? Okay, can I just write any question paper? Any question that comes to my mind, can I write them and give it as my assessment strategy? Way of looking at it? No. I need to look at the parameters that are there. So while dealing with learning, I said that we have to consider the domains of learning. That is affective domain, cognitive domain, and the psychomotor domain. In all these three processes, the learning is happening, and it is complex process. And ultimately, my learning, knowing aspect must translate itself into performance-oriented, that is skill-oriented. How is that is being accommodated? How is those are going to be tested, captured, is to be seen in terms of my deliberate blueprint or the three-dimensional chart that we were using it earlier. Now, in the present context, we call that as table of specifications. Okay, you need to specify which cognitive domain, which kind of knowledge, okay, which dimension of the cognitive domain you are testing, and what kind of questions you are going to test. So all these must be specified very clearly in a table. So the three important dimensions that I need to consider while preparing this table is, I need to consider the weightage that I am going to give to my content, my subject knowledge, whether it is if only 1 unit, 2 unit, 3 or all the 4 units I am going to consider. If all the 4 are considered, if you consider University of Mysore factor as a reference factor, so all unit, every course will have only 4 units. Okay, after first and second unit, you must have your C1 test. After third and fourth unit, you must have C2 test, and your C3 will cover the unit 1 and 4 in all the format. And even in the C3, the question format is limited. Okay, the unit 1 will have only one question or one internal choice questions may be there between one unit. And second unit also, there are 2 questions in unit 1, 2 questions in unit 2, 2 in unit 3, and 2 in unit 4. And the 5th question covers all the 4 units. So it is in that way, marks are distributed, 10 marks each for each unit. And the 5th question covers all the 4. There is a choice for individual to select from whichever unit he is comfortable with and try to give the answer. Okay, so that means here, each unit has appropriate representations. Weightage is given. So no unit is considered as less and no unit is considered as most important. So each one of them are treated equally. So even in that way, how do you treat them as weightage to content? So even now, we say that when you look into the weightage of the content, what kind of knowledge you are going to test can also be looked into. Whether it is a factual knowledge you want to test, or a conceptual knowledge, or a procedural knowledge, or a metacognitive knowledge that you want to test can also be listed out, specified, and accordingly you can say what is the weightage, what is the a percentage of weightage that you are going to give for this kind of knowledge can also be looked at. Then weightage to the objectives. So here we are trying to look into the cognitive process objectives. So that is your only the remembering, understanding, application, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. So there are 6 levels of cognitive objectives. So among them, how many of them you are going to give them? If your question is addressing only the remembering level, understanding level, application level, these are considered as lower level thinking order questions, LOT. Lower order thinking questions. If you are trying to frame questions addressing to analysis, analyzing, evaluating, and creating activity, these are considered as higher order thinking questions. Okay, you are trying to make the learner to test at these 2 different levels of thinking abilities. So cognition is nothing but promoting their thought process, thinking abilities. How do you promote that? So how much of weightage you are giving to the lower order, how much of that you are giving to higher order? Is your question is completely lower order means you are only testing the basic remembering idea, understanding ideas, only application ideas, and not going beyond that. So that means your all question papers are going to be too easy and everybody will attempt and find success in that. So if you want to give only the higher level order questions, and then you say that your learners are not able to attempt that, and therefore you will see that your results are going to be very, very less. So how do you balance this? So there must be some amount of lower order questions and some amount of higher order questions catering to different objectives also to be considered. And the third dimensions that you need to consider is the kinds of forms of questions that you are going to use. Okay, so at the university level, so we have only the essay type, or it is long answer or short answer according to your own understandings. You classify them and put them in that order. So otherwise, when you go to any public examinations, we see that many of them are only MCQs. No descriptive type of questions are there. Now, when you look into the CBSE board exams as +10 and 10th and +2 level 12th standard, now they have combination of subjective type questions and objective type questions. So how do I mix them? How do I have a balance between objective and subjective type questions? Can also be looked into. And again, in subjective type questions, so you can see that there are 2 varieties that we can create. One is short answer questions. Another one is long answer, or which we call it as essay type of questions. We can try to frame and try to use them. So where these questions are demands and expects the more subject-oriented informations only. It doesn't demand more of its application in any given context or any situations. Okay, if that is the case, then you are focusing on subjective type of questions. Where objective type of questions means here, where whoever gives this question, administer this, whoever responds across the country or across the globe will get the same answer, and it can be valued and assessment as the same question. If it is correct, 1 marks, wrong means 0 marks. So there is no biasness, there is no scope for giving any other favoritism there. So then your question is framed objectively, it is valued objectively, and the results are announced objectively. Okay, so everything is very objective. So therefore they are called as more as objective type of questions. In that we have multiple choice questions, we have matching type questions, then we have completion type questions, then we may have yes or no type or true or false type, and even there are analogy type of questions. And if you go to any of the higher order JEE or any NEET exams or any other higher order IIT entrance exams, you will have other varieties of questions which makes you to read, reason out, draw your conclusions, and finally make your answers. And even you know that in many of the competitive examination, all your wrong answers are also subjected to deduction of marks. So that means here you cannot answer it very casually unless and until you are very sure you have the depth knowledge, you have the exact knowledge. Only then you are able to pick the right answer. So that is how your cognitive abilities should end up in making the right decision making abilities. How is that ability is developed can be seen only through your objective type of questions. So when I prepare a table, so it is a 2x2 or many 4x2 table or 5x or 10 table, it may look like grid will be there. So on the front grid, you'll have the content and objectives running across. Across each objectives, we'll have varieties of forms of questions. Okay, through that, I can able to see what is the weightage you are given to the content knowledge, what is the weightage you are given to the objectives, and what is the weightage you are given to various forms of questions. I can read them across the table, horizontally, vertically, and try to see how well you have balanced this, the questions and the subject that you want to do. So without preparing this blueprint, without understanding the essence of this, if you just frame the questions and just give it, so you may not be trying to consider all the related factors which are essential to be considered in assessment procedures. Okay. Now, when I put these, all of them stable of specification into functional form, I have to construct questions. I have to write the questions. The questions are the statements that we are going to write. And what my question paper contains is a question, and each question must have its own characteristics, which we call it as characteristics of a good question. What are those characteristics? The first characteristics is, I say that you have to use simple language. So that means here, you should not demonstrate your expertise in the language. You need to use the language which your learners are understanding. So it must be familiar with your learners' learning language abilities. Okay, you use that kind of a language, even your learners can understand without any much difficulty. Then that question must be self-instructional as well as self-directional. So that means when I read the question, it should tell me what this is expecting, and it should also give me a direction of what I must write. Okay. So it is in that way, your question must be having those characteristics built into that. It must indicate the exact response demanded by the question. So that means here you should not allow the learner to interpret it in multiple ways. So okay, if you read it, everybody should say this question was demanding only this kind of a response. So I must give only this response only. Only if that is being the major interpretation that everybody should arrive at. It should not give any ambiguity or any confusions in the responder's mind. So that is what your question must have. Then you must know the merits and limits of each kind of question. So that means here, as we have stated in the previous slide, I have a subjective type questions and objective type of questions, and what are their characteristics and when to use them, how best it can be used in what context, and if it is not possible, what is the other alternative way I have to look at it. So you have to look at each question's merits and its demerits or the limitations that you can look at it. Okay. Okay, it is in that way you have to prepare your question. So that means while assessment requires you to become skilled and mastered in constructing a good questions. It is not a casual activity. It is a deliberate activity, intellectual activity that you are demonstrating by creating the questions or by writing a question which makes the learner, your respondent, to respond it in the way you want him to respond. So that must be reflected in your questions that you write, that you give. Okay, so it is in that way I am trying to look at it. Okay, now I'll give one example. Now, if I write the question, define force. Okay, this is a question I have given. And now see whether all the three characteristics are built into it or not. Does it have simple language? Okay, assume that it is for class 8th or 9th, wherever they are going to study that. Is the language I have used, is it too complicated or complex one? Define force. Okay, they are simple because they have read the same concept and the terms are being used, they are familiarized with the terms, and therefore it is simple language. Is it self-instructional? So that means when I read that question, what it is directing me, about what it is directing me, it is only asking me to talk about only the force. So when I talk about the force, I must only give the definition. I cannot give my own meaning of the term force. Okay, I'm asking for a definition quoted by some scientists or which we have already accepted. So I am expecting only one closed particular response. I cannot give open-ended response there. Okay, so therefore, my question is only directing. It is directing. It is self-instructional. So you cannot give any example. It doesn't say give example for it. No, if he is giving, it is his own choice. But the question only demands him to define. Force is nothing but the product of mass into acceleration. If he writes that, that is the essential answer responses that is demanded by this question. If he adds extra thing to that, so he may give example. Some may also illustrate with the diagram. Their extra learning they want to demonstrate, let them demonstrate. But the question doesn't demand it. So when the questions are given like this, they must be self-instructional, self-directional, and it should also tell that respondent what exactly this question is demanding from you. And accordingly, they must be able to act on this particular kind of knowledge. Okay, so that is what I'm going to look at it. So when I frame any questions of anything, ensure that when I read, when a learner reads it, it gives the same meaning and it is seen in the same interpretation has been done by both of them. There should not be any confusion. If I read it or somebody reads it, everybody should get the same meaning and same interpretation. Only then you say that this question is a very good question. So you can see in many examinations, okay, in many of the Karnataka Public Service Commission examinations, okay, when they publish the question paper, when they publish the answer sheet, in the very next day you'll find in the newspaper there are varieties of comments on that. Okay, and then APSC also takes measures saying that yes, it has been considered and we give grace marks or take some decisions and other kinds of things have been done. So all these things, you need to look at that. Your questions are not only to your learner, it is observed, monitored by everybody in the community, in the society, and we are answerable to everyone whoever questions that. So don't think that I am not questioned by anybody else, I need not answer. So you have the moral responsibility to respond to everyone who poses questions on these similar issues. So that means you should have the mastery of constructing a good questions in any subject's question paper. Now, what are the types of assessment that we try to do it in classroom? Okay, so based on the different context and situation and the way it is being asked and posed, we classify different types of assessment. Okay, there is not one way, there are multiple ways of doing it. Now, what are those that we are trying to look at? So here we classify them as majorly, now we are trying to look at them as three categories that we talk about. One is assessment of learning. So that means here when the learning has happened and when you want to ensure that you want to test what the learning has happened or not, then only you are going to use the assessment of learning. So that means at the end of the learning activity, if you want to do it, then it becomes your summative assessment. So all our semester end examination can also be treated as your summative examination, assessment activity only. So that is anything that we want to do it at the end of the activity, all of them become summative and all of them qualify to be considered as assessment of learning. The second factor is assessment for learning. So that means when the learning is being happening, okay, that is the process. When you look at the off, it is the product. But here, the assessment for learning, we are looking into the process of when it is being happening in actual context. It is during learning activity only. We are trying to do the assessment activity. So such activity of assessment, we now classify and call them as formative assessment. Okay, why it has been named as formative means the new idea is being formed. with the new experiences, new activity that you have introduced in your classroom transactions. And with that, he is interacting in his own way. And by doing the activity, he has his own experiences. He matches with the past experiences that he has already. And with that, he tries to modify his own experiences and accept some, reject some. And all this process have been done. In that process, if we done it in the right way, we are going to appreciate that, encourage it to be in the same way. If it is in the wrong way, the teacher can use it as a diagnostic assessment there. He can go deeper into his why he has committed such a mistake and try to rectify that through remedial activities. So that means when the ideas are being done, if the assessment is done, and if the teacher is able to identify something which is not in the right direction, then he can bring the learner into the right direction by his own support systems, support activities. So it is in that way, when the new ideas are being formed, assessment is done and it is supported if it is correct. So it is in that way we say it is assessment for learning. Okay, it is processful. Then the next one is assessment as learning. So that means here, so as I said in learning outcomes, we need to encourage the learner to become the partners in our assessment procedures. So it is not a one-sided activity. It is not only teacher-centered activity. We want to make this assessment as a collaborative activities, bringing learners as the partners in the learning procedures and making partners even in the assessment also. So it is in that way, if you are bringing everybody on board in the process, entire process, then we say it is assessment as learning. So that means here, you are encouraging the learners also to learn, to know the art of doing assessment activities. Okay, you are inducting him into the what is exactly is the assessment, how it is being done, how things are happening, and how it is to be looked at, and how it is to be judged. All the entire process is being exposed to, made him to learn also along with that process is going to do that. So that is what we call it as assessment as learning. If we are going for out-based learning, then we say we call the same assessment as learning as authentic assessment. So that means here, whatever assessment you do it must reflect in the individual's performance also. The learners must demonstrate all the competencies that must be acquired through your subject whenever it is demanded. Okay, for example, you are a graduate student, and if you are not able to write a simple application to a government officer without any errors in language, not able to communicate explicitly in a very simple terms, then what is the use of your graduations? Okay, that is what we say. What you have acquired, what your certificate says, and what you demonstrate, there must be one-to-one matching. If there is no matching, then we say they don't believe in the certification given by any authorities. So therefore, you can say this is happening in the public sector, corporate sector, industries, that though you have been called for interview only to cross-verify whether you possess these abilities, competencies within you and able to apply them independently as per the requirement or not is going to be tested. So that means your own marks cards, your own certificates issued by universities are not all the times are going to be valid. So it is going to be cross-checked with different mechanisms and then try to verify to what extent you match with that and then try to go ahead with that. So therefore, we are trying to say that all our assessment that we do must be valid, accepted by any agencies for any purposes. That is what we try to do it. Now, for example, now how parents test the students' language learning abilities. Do they use the textbook? Do they use the textbook and questions to ask the students to know what is their language? They test them only them by asking them to read the newspaper that they get it at home. If the student doesn't read the newspaper and doesn't able to interpret what he has read it very clearly, then the parents will make an inference that learning in language is not happened in the desired way. How they are testing the mathematical ability of the learners? by sending their children to shop or to a marketplace to buy something, and through that activity they are testing it. It doesn't mean that we should only test them only through paper pencil. It can be done in many ways, in many forms. So that is what you have to see. So what I do in school, in classroom, whatever I certify about a learner, it should be accepted by the parents and even in the society also. That is what we mean by authentic assessment. If I'm not able to match with that, then this is not possible. So this is possible only when learner is made a partner in the entire assessment procedures. So that means here it says that you must declare what he or she is going to learn in this particular semester and how their assessment procedures are going to be carried out and how things are going to happen. All complete detailing must be dealt out, spelled out. Only then you are able to frame your own assessment strategies, and both learner and teacher must stick to that calendar and then try to carry out the assessment activities as decided in partnership. So these are the three major assessment types that we have here. And then apart from that, if you are using constructivist approaches or if you are using connectionist theories of learning, then they demand and they emphasize the learners to also to be doing on their own things. So that is what they are trying to say as peer assessment. That is same age group of students making their own assessment, comparing their own performances and trying to make their own conclusion about their own performances. That is what. So it is not a competition that is building. It is an healthy way of looking at things and trying to see who is best and why it is best and why where I am lacking and how is that I am this group is there for me to improve upon that. So that is what the peer assessment will help us to do that. And finally, they say that every individual should enable themselves with the competencies of doing their own assessment. Self-assessment has to be done in their own ways. That can be done. Then we have the then followed by teacher assessment. The teacher, as a subject knowledge authority, he has created varieties of learning situations, opportunities, environment in the classroom for a period of time. So he can also assess using the two forms of testing. One can do it. One is the criterion reference testing. So you will use your subject knowledge unit as the criteria, what they demand. Against those criteria, you will frame questions and try to assess them. Then NRT is nothing but the norm reference testing, where you are trying to test them across the different categories of learning. Learners not taught by you also can be coming into the picture. Like the 10th board exam or the PU board exams, all of them are norm reference testing. Okay, they take care of both rural, urban, semi-urban, any area, any school, whether with facilities, without facilities, all these things are considered, and accordingly all those factors are figured, considered, and accordingly the questions are okay based on those performances. So then you are able to establish what is the state norms, what is the state educational percentage, and based on that educational percentage of the state, even district wise percentage are listed out, and you will have the district standing on that, which district stood first, second, third, fourth. So in Karnataka, it is only the Udupi district which was standing first, earlier undivided the Dakshin Kannada. Now it is Udupi, then comes Dakshin Kannada, then Udupi, then Bangalore, north, south, everything like this it comes. It doesn't mean that. So with your city, with all your facilities, with enriched environment, you are assured of performing better. It is not the case. Okay, so you can make the comparison and try to see what factors is improving at, what factors are impeding it, and how things needs to be done, how it is to be addressed, can be looked at it. Now you may be aware of in Karnataka board exams are going to come up next week, and now they have got varieties of other alternative mechanisms, okay, where they are trying to empower these students with varieties of alternative learning and improve their positions in the board examination. Okay, so it is that analysis and actions are can be taken up based on these kinds of testing that you can do. Now we also go into the individuals learning activity, saying that each learner is unique individual, and therefore each individual's learning must be captured in the form of a portfolio. Okay, now if you go to any mutual stock exchange, or if you want to buy any mutual fund investment, there they talk about which is your portfolio. Okay, where you want to invest, long term, medium term, or it is immediate term, whatever you want to use it. Okay, is it SIP or it is one-time investment? So they look into what is the ability you have and what is the percentage of risk you can take and how much of things that you are supposed to do it. So it is similarly when you go to hospital, you have to go to visit any hospital, public hospital, they'll have their own medical records so that when you go to the next visit, they can refer back and see for what you came here, what references were given, what medications were given, and now what is the problem that you have. Is it the same kind repetitive or is it something new? And based on that continuity, they are able to treat you. So in the similar way, in the portfolio now, when the student comes in the first day for the first semester, how was he? And when he goes out in the 8th semester, how is he? Is it improved in his language, in his learning, in different subjects, his participation in the class and outside the class? Everything can be recorded and try to look at it in a very comprehensive manner. So therefore, you can portfolio as nothing but compilation of all the best accomplished achievement of the learner. Okay, the best achievement, not every achievement. Even the test paper can be part of that. Examination papers can be part of that. Any certification obtained in a cultural, co-curricular, sports or any other event can be part of that. So keeping those things, you are in a position to provide other educational services. Like you may give educational guidance service, you can give personal guidance service, you can give vocational guidance services to him. By looking into in what areas he has got the strength, in which areas he has got weaknesses, and which he can manage and improve upon. All this can be seen only when you have the portfolio, complete information about the child. So that can be looked into. When you want to put that portfolio collection of all the items, art and artifacts of an individual and put them into assessment, then you have to frame the rubrics. So we call that as rubric assessment. Portfolios can be assessed only by rubric. So rubric is again a grid that you are going to have, and it can be, it has to be prepared by the teacher, looking into what criteria the learners are being exposed to, the experiences they are gained into, and having their own criteria, you have to prepare your own rubrics for assessing your own students. Okay, so that is what the rubric assessment is talks about. They can get the information. There are varieties of information available on the websites also on creation, what is rubrics and how do I create rubrics and how do I use it. But there is no ready-made available templates. Templates may be there, but you need to create according to your situation. No ready-made template will help us to our conditions and our requirement. So we need to fulfill our own criteria by developing our own rubric criteria. Okay, these are the types of assessments that we have. Okay, then what are the tools that I have for making the assessments? Okay, so these are the tools that we have with us for making the assessment. Okay, now the first one, observations and the interview. I can use both of them as tools as well as my technique. Okay. Now I have used the observation. When I enter into the class, I will just look at every student, try to establish the eye contact and ensure that everybody is seated in a proper manner and everybody is paying attention. Okay, if I don't observe them in that way, then anybody can sit anywhere and they can indulge in their own activity and you start teaching. So it means that you have not tried to bring in decorum into the classroom and students are free to do their own work. So I have used that observation as a technique there. But when I want to see them in depth, what they are doing, why they are doing and how they are doing it, then I have to prepare my observation schedule. Okay, which indicates when and how these are observations are going to be done, how they are going to be documented, recorded, and how they are going to be used for my interpretation. If all this detailing, if you do it, then it becomes my tool. If I don't do all the detailings and just use it casually in a normal way as we do it, then it becomes my technique. Similarly, interview, also I just ask questions in the interviews. Okay, here also I just ask the questions in the open forum. Somebody responded it. So I may use that as technique. So interview is only getting information. So I try to get information in a formal way or informal way. I can do that. If I try to do the interview, if I want to interact with a person of the subject knowledge background, expertise, expert in that particular field, I want to extract more information on the subject. Then I have to ask only relevant questions on the subject itself. So then it becomes my structured interview. I will list out the questions that I need to ask and the kind of response I know I'm likely to expect from him. So I try to look at that. So I do the interview in structured way or unstructured way, we start doing it. So my observations and interview, I can use both of them as tool or as well as technique. Otherwise, all other things are going to be my tools. So my questionnaires. So questionnaire is a question paper that we write, okay, that we use. All questions demand some kind of information to be supplied by the respondent. I consolidate that and then try to do that. Okay, that is what we mean by questionnaire. So that even we use that for all kinds of test and examination that we perform at any level, all of them becomes our questionnaire. Now, apart from this, I can also use my checklist. So I can see how many of them have come to my class or not come to my class. So checklist only says yes or no, present or absent. Okay, rating scale, it is to be seen what factor you are going to look at it and how qualitatively it is good at and how do I measure them. And those qualitative aspects cannot be measured absolutely. So I try to put them in a different scale in a relative terms. So if I put them, then it becomes my rating scales. So it is anecdotal records. I can try to use it, which is nothing but an individual doing extraordinary activity beyond his physical age. Okay, a small age people performing a higher age person's work is what we call it as extraordinary event. Like India government of India is giving what do you call that, a bravery award to the children on the occasion of Republic Day celebration. Okay, all those children, though they are of different age levels, they have performed extraordinary event in a normal life situation. So they have been appreciated and given the Shaurya Prasastis. Okay, like this, with the similar way, if somebody has done extraordinarily great thing at the college level, even having a intellectual property right, IPL in his credit, published the article in a journal, enacted in a TV or any event, all of them can be put as rare events and it can be looked at. Okay, as I said, portfolio, same thing, you can collect it and do it. Then you can have the focus group discussions, which we call it as a qualitative measuring tool, where a group of people come together and talk about the same theme and giving the different views and opinions on that, what they think, and try to consolidate them and try to put that in a very qualitative manner is what we can try to do it. And you can also give varieties of project work that you can give, which we call it as now hands-on experiences activity. Even apprenticeship can be looked into, your internship can be looked into as your project related work. Through that, you will trying to see how theoretical knowledge is applied in any given context and how you are making use of the knowledge for your own developmental activities. So even that can also be put into the assessment criteria in terms of your planning, your execution, time taken, the material used, and the product that you have come, its efficiency, its appearance, its functionalities, all these factors can be considered and can be assessed. And even the assignments that we give, okay, it can be your seminar assignments that you try to give them, or any other assignments of any kinds can also be looked into as your tools of assessment. So that means here, it is not only the paper pencil test, it can be looked into in different ways also. If there are children with special needs in your class, okay, then your assessment must be inclusive in nature. Then therefore, you need to modify your tool, which meets the requirement of the children with special. Okay, you need to modify your tool, which meets to the requirement. So it is in that way you are able to look at that. Your assessment is not just a casual activity. It is a purposeful activity which is enshrined to meet that your requirements are going to be fulfilled by the kind of tool that you have used. and it is able to get the information that you want to make a qualitative judgment on a particular issue that you want to make. So if these are not there, then you may not be able to come to the any of the conclusive general conclusions or a meaningful conclusion which you are able to accept or any other system is likely to accept. So it is in that context you have to look at it. Assessment is a deliberate activity. So without this tool also I do that. Okay, like for example, I'll ask oral question in the class. When I'm teaching in the class, I ask oral question, they give me oral response. Okay. So it is questioning, though I have used question there, it is done orally and it is response is given orally. So when I come to test and examination, it is a paper, it is a written form, question I have given in written form, and the responses is also coming to me as a in a written form, and the written forms gives me the concrete evidences. Whereas my oral question, oral response doesn't have any evidences. It is only my statements that I make. To what extent it is accepted or rejected is left to the assessor who is going to look at it. But the paper pencil test gives us the exact evidences of how things are going to be looked at. But we need not focus only on paper pencil test. Like then I can also try to look at the performance of the individual in actual performing activities. Like for example, dancing. When I want to assess the dance performance, I cannot put that in paper pencil test. I have to see them in the actual actions only. So I have to put them in performance context only. I have to test them. I have to assess them in that. So I have the assessment based on the mode of assessment. I do it as oral, written, or performance based. And the kind of questions that I ask, is it my oral question or written question that I'm going to ask, will also change as that. And when I am going to conduct this assessment, whether I am going to do it during the things, it becomes my internal assessment. If I am trying to do it at the end of that, then it becomes my external assessment. Okay, if I'm doing it on my own, it's a teacher-centered activity. If I'm trying to do it, then I consider it as external. So when the question paper comes from the outside agency, then I say it is an external examination. So, okay, like this, I am able to categorize my assessment factors based on many issues. But in all the cases, there must be some kind of questions, and it must be posed to them in one or different forms of modes of questioning. I have to use it, and the response also I need to get them, and I need to record them, and I need to justify my own actions. The ultimate essence of this is whatever teacher does as assessment is the absolute one, because teacher is in constant touch with the learners and is trying to see the progress of the learner every day, every moment in the class, and therefore is a more authentic person to make a qualitative judgment on the learner. So it is in that perspective you have to see that assessment is an integral part of your teaching learning process, and it is your own way of looking at things and using it for only for your own self-improvement or your own professional development also. You can try to look at that and try to bring in the changes and then try to make those changes for your own self-developmental activity. Okay, so with that, now I stop here. So if you have any questions regarding these issues, you are free to ask them.
Sir.
Yes.
Sir, shall we prepare the question papers on the basis of blueprint at colleges, sir? Because here we are getting that university papers for semester exams, sir. If
Yes.
Primary and high school teachers means, sir, they have to prepare their essay question papers for their classrooms, sir. But
Yes.
you are supplying that question paper means, sir.
Yes.
Why you have to using this blueprint? What is the use
Not
of
only
this
at the
blueprint?
university level, even you might inquire into the KPSC or any other public examination system, even they also demand the blueprint. But the blueprint at the school level, you may consider from the subject perspective, At the higher level, you are looking into the higher order level of thinking. Okay, to what level of thinking you are testing is what's so important there. So therefore, to look at what kind of thinking abilities you are testing at what kinds. So there also your blueprint is required. Okay, and there you are, when you look at into varieties of any question paper setting, there we are going to write what kind of question it is. Okay, what level of question it is, the difficulty level of question. Okay, the time taken to be the maximum time for giving the response is also estimated and written there. Okay, based on the question you say, as a test constructor, you may say that it is a very simple question. You may write it's easy one. And when I say it is easy, the time taken to answer that must be less than 1 minute. It cannot be more than 60 seconds. So what is that? So I have to consider the knowledge and the time factor to respond to that. Okay, so it is based on these parameters we
Okay,
write.
sir.
Yes, but
Agree,
here
sir.
there in the
When,
public examination, we are not looking into the content. Even in that, they give the various subject areas. You say that syllabus, out of syllabus, many will object. It is out of syllabus question has come. But the question may not be directly reflected, but it is the core element of the question is being there. But if one doesn't read and analyze very clearly, then he cannot appreciate the core demand of the question itself. So it is in that way, even at the higher levels, the blueprint is essential. Okay, though in that question paper, we may not use all kinds of questions there. So we may use 1 or 2 types of questions. Okay, but still, as a test constructor, you must know which is the target group. Okay, but at the graduation level, even at any competitive exam, we consider all of them are adult, above 18 years of age. So they are cognitively matured. They are able to deal with any kind of questions which are abstract or physical or not abstract questions also very meaningfully and deal and write in an effective manner. So it is in that way we try to see the potential, we try to see the performance of the learners in those dimensions. Okay, even there also they try to make it.
I agree this, sir. When I was the primary school teacher, I used to do all this because we are following the blueprint and we are prepare our question papers, essay question papers on the basis of blueprints only. But
Yes.
when we entered into college, there is we are seeing different setups. That's why I have confusions because just 2 or 3 months back we are joined to this higher education system. That's why I'm asking.
Fine. Just apply it, extend it to the higher levels. Don't go to the lower level. Okay, don't ask only the remembering, understanding. So even if you look at the many of the question papers of the university, they are only testing the understanding level. Some of them are application. Okay, some of them are analytical, analyzing factors. Okay, some of them may not even, they might not have gone to even evaluate or create level. Okay, it may not be possible in all examinations. Okay, but our intention is to say that they are able to demonstrate the competencies that they have acquired through the language, the subject. Okay, we are trying to test the competencies. Now we have to move towards testing their competency rather than testing their mastery in the content knowledge. So when you want to move towards the competencies means you have to go for creating even higher order questions. Now we are also talking about moving towards open book examination. So when I say open book examination, then the teacher must say which are the books that have been prescribed for this. Okay, and he should make sure that learners are also having access to this book, isn't it? He cannot create question which he is referring. And the book is not available in the library or anywhere. And if you think that, and if he's constructing and then he say it is open book examination, bring any book and write by looking at the book, it doesn't serve the purpose because time limit is same. It is same 2 hours, 3 hours. And if the learner is not exposed to the book, he has not read the book, he will not able to pinpointedly say in which chapter, which page this idea is reflected. Isn't it? So though we are talking about more advanced examination reforms, so he has to be looking into the way in which the competencies are looked at. Okay, like for example, one example I'm giving. Okay, frog in one jump travels, okay, 6 inches. Okay, after 10 jumps. What is the distance traveled? Okay, is it a science question? Is it a math question? Or is it a general knowledge question? Yes. So look at it. This question,
Apply for all, sir.
it cut across all these subjects. So you should know what is frog. And it's no frog makes it jumping. Now, if I say 6 inches, it may not be realistic. It may not be realistic, but he has to imagine 6 inches. Okay, it jumps. It takes 10 jumps. Then he has to imagine how it is jumping. What is the distance traveled? Distance is again a science concept. And ultimately, he has to give the number. It is a mathematical concept. Okay, so the competencies are like that. It is not only one subject related. He has to apply all the knowledge that he has learned in that particular course or across different courses in the same level and try to put that into action to get the solution. Problematic situation is given, now he has to find the solution using his own knowledge of every kind. That is what we mean by competency based testing. Okay, so India went for that PISA test, performance of international school assessment. Okay, performance at the international school level. So that means your language is not a barrier. Content is not a barrier. Everybody has to learn the same content according to the set criteria of age limit that we have. Okay, and any kind that of questions I give in any language, everybody should understand, interpret it in the same way, and I must get the same responses. So when such a things were there, when such questions, India took only some selected KV schools and Navodaya schools went for that examination. In that, only 72 countries participated in that, and we are in the bottom 2. Okay, indicating that we are emphasizing more on the subject and more on rote memory aspect rather than developing into competency oriented. So the move is from applying the subject learned knowledge into real life context and try to see how we can overcome that given context. So therefore, we need to construct questions which are testing the real competencies derived from the subject, learning of the subject, rather than only testing their superficial knowledge level question by asking them to define, asking them to describe, asking them to explain, asking them to illustrate. If you do that, they are only superficial level knowledge. You are not going in depth into their understandings of the knowledge. Okay, so try to construct those kinds of questions which really enables you to visualize the competencies that needs to be demonstrated by the learners. Okay, so in that context also, it always need not be your worded kind of problems. I can use the figural form. I can use figure with the word. Okay, I can give the story pictures. I can give some picture and ask them to narrate a story about it. They do it on their own. Imagination, I am testing their imagination. Okay, their vocabulary, their way of interconnecting the characters and trying to make a meaningful reading or passage out of that. I'm trying to look at it. Okay, so these are the things I must try to understand rather than only looking into a rigid framework of your